Heather Dugan with Headline Books and Zoom into Books, and we are at the American Library Association Annual Conference in Chicago. Exciting place to be. I am sitting here with author Robert Genetski. We are going to talk about his book, Is There Evidence for God? So let's zoom into books and tell me about this. Why did you write this book?
Well, it was something that I always had in mind, writing all my life, thinking about God. You know, I was kind of puzzled at the fact that we all seem, or many people, many of us seem, as I did, to take whatever religion or whatever thoughts about God our parents give us. And that's just a strong tendency, and that's what I had done, and that's the easy way out. So I never really looked into the question of God or religions to any extent at all. And then one day, I was talking to my 90-year-old mother. This is 3 years before she was going to die.
Okay.
And she looked at me, and she said, you know, I don't think God really exists, and I don't think there's anything after I die. And I was stunned because she had been to church all her life. She had read the Bible, a complete turnaround. And I said, Mom, you know, most people are the opposite. When they get old and ready to die, they start cutting their losses and deciding maybe I should go to church just in case something good. So at any rate, I was absolutely stunned and I felt inadequate. I couldn't answer her. Because what am I going to say? You told me about this. Now you're telling me. It turned out that one of her friends had told her that God was simply an invention by people for weak-minded people who simply couldn't cope with things. And I think this was the first challenge to her faith she ever had, and she didn't know how to deal with it.
She probably got it from her parents as well, and faith, maybe? Yeah. So, okay. So you stopped, and you did something with that question.
Yes. I think that was the real spark finally got me going on this project that I always wanted to do, but never had the time for. And as an economist, I started what I thought was the most logical way of laying out the challenge at hand. And that is, if you want to know if there's God or not a God, you first of all go to the atheists, the people who are certain that there is not a God. And so I went and I started just picking up atheist books one after another, reading through them. Them very persuasive. They had done just what I was going to do. They were searching for God, and they came up with an answer. There is no God. And the one thing that bothered me about what the atheists said is they kept saying and repeating over and over again, there is no evidence for God. But they never provided any insight into whether there was evidence for God. You see, they said it so many times. As a matter of fact, one author said it 4 times on one page, and he said it every other page for his first 100 pages in the book. And I said, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. There's no evidence. I'm going to have to look into this question of evidence myself. And so that's what I did.
That's your title. I like this. Is there evidence for God? An economist searches for answers. So how in the world do you organize for something like this? I mean, usually we have like thought cards or you know, this is so,
It was a challenge, but see, I've been involved in research all my life. I have a PhD in economics from NYU. I taught at NYU, taught at the University of Chicago's Graduate School of Business. But most of my life was not spent teaching. It was spent in the business area, where I was director of research for a number of organizations. I had research people under me that I would direct in complex projects of finance and economics. So I had a background in research, so I was going to approach this as a logical, Star Trek, Mr. Spock type person, and just look for the evidence wherever I could find it. And after I considered the atheists, I found something lacking. You see, there is always evidence for every viewpoint. The question isn't that there's no evidence. It's, is the evidence weak or strong? And they never even considered it. As a matter of fact, the atheists say they can't conceive of any evidence. Now imagine if you were being tried for a murder and the people in the jury couldn't conceive of your innocence. How do you think you'd feel? Are you going to get a fair trial?
That's a good comparison there. Interesting. So that's analyst brain. You lay it out. You've organized. You've got a structure in your head.
After the atheist, I'm going to go on and I'm going to look for the scientific evidence
Yes.
of life after death. How strong is it? And there's a lot of evidence out there.
Yeah.
Near-death experiences, and we've all heard of them.
We have certainly everybody hears this.
After that, I said, let's go on to look into miracles. And there's some good research that has been done into miracles at colleges. It's an accepted group of researchers and scientists. I then looked into the religions of the world. I wanted to look into all of them. So I had to read the religious books.
Right.
It was quite a project.
It sounds, how long did all this take?
It took probably 10, 11 years. This was,
That sounds short. That sounds like a small amount of time for all that.
Short. Well, I
It's a
went
lot of
from
stuff.
one book
Yeah.
to another. And, as I'd go into one thing, find something out, it would lead me to two or three other things. So it took a while.
Right. Well, I can see. I get into some research myself, and I'm thinking this is so broad because when you're talking all the religions,
It's tough to narrow it down when you're dealing about God and the big questions.
Well, that's a good way to put it. So what was obviously the organization, just the simple compiling and making sense of the data you're finding in a meaningful way. But I mean, what was the greatest challenge? Was that it, or what?
Well, the greatest challenge in any sort of research is to recognize which of the experts you're looking at on two different sides of the issue has the stronger evidence to support their case.
Yes.
And that's true in economics. It was true in each case.
Okay, so looking to see what makes evidence strong or weak. What would you say? I mean, is your
Well, when I went through the book, I felt I found a lot of evidence that appealed to me.
Yes.
And I often said, this evidence might not appeal to you. This is what I found.
right?
This is why it appeals to me.
Okay.
I'm sure if you come up with some other reasons why it might not appeal to you, that's fine. It's
Right.
up to you. We each have to make up our own choices because we each come from a different background, a different set of knowledge, a different set of skills.
So it sounds like you're kind of presenting it so that people can you're showing the both sides, like the weak and the
As best I can.
Yes.
You have to fight to hide your biases. Anyone does.
understand.
And I'm sure mine come through in spite of every effort.
Because you've looked at your whole project and come to your own conclusions on
And as I find evidence that appeals to me, I become more involved in the process.
That's the human condition, isn't it? That's our constant struggle to fight against our own selves. But it sounds really interesting, I gotta say. Now, I mean, so tell me, you've gone through this whole thing. What was the evidence for God that you found to be the most compelling to you personally?
I have to begin by saying that there's so much.
Yes.
Let me just try and narrow it down to what appealed most to me. And it's just a question of time. Now, I forecast things in economics. I forecast the stock market. I don't go out more than a year for forecasting. When you look at the Old Testament, which was 1,000 to 1,500 years before Jesus was born, there are predictions for 500 years, predictions of what's going to happen when the Messiah comes. And the Messiah comes more than half a century after that. Now, who does a forecast for half a millennium? I mean, we don't do it.
No, we don't.
That seems to be coming, it seemed to me to be coming from somewhere else because Jesus fulfilled those predictions to a very great extent, even to the extent of the crucifixion, death, and abuse that he suffered before that. All of that was predicted more than 500 years before, and those things are very old. Lo and behold, he did. There's another thing too, and this deals with time.
Yes.
Fascinated by, and this was the Jewish celebration of Passover, the time when Moses was trying to get his people out of Egypt, and God told him to take the tribe headed by Aaron and separate them from the Jewish people, give them a separate charge as priests in Jerusalem. And now, interestingly enough, 1,000 to 1,500 years later, in the gospel, when we talk about Jesus, Jesus was a Jew whose family every year celebrated the Passover. They went to Jerusalem, they celebrated. How do you do that? And not only that, but let's go forward to today. We're 2,000 years beyond this, we're 3,000 to 3,500 years from the Passover, and we still have Jewish people celebrating the Passover every year. And it gets even stranger than that when you go into the scientific evidence, because there's recent DNA evidence on the Jewish population, a study that has been done to locate something called the Cohen gene, and that research ends up traveling back through time to the time of Aaron, when God established his first priesthood. And more interesting than that, I found, is that there are many of these Cohen people today who are very active in the Jewish synagogues and taking part in the ceremonies. It's almost as if a priesthood that was established by God 3,500 years ago or so, still today. It's that when you talk about evidence. And if we have time, the most impressive evidence to me of modern times comes from the miracle of Fatima that occurred. This occurred in an isolated village in Portugal, middle of Portugal, in 1917. Actually, May 13th, these three little children, the oldest was 10, said they saw a vision of the Virgin Mary. And they went home, and they tried to keep it secret, but they couldn't. One of them, the youngest one, blurted it out. And so the parents got very upset. They said, "You're lying. You're not telling the truth." And these are very religious kids. And they said, "No, we are." Well, the local priest told them they would go to hell for lying like this. And they said, "No, the Virgin told us she's coming back every month on the 13th to appear to us and tell us about this." And sure enough, each month the children went back, they saw the vision, and each month the crowds grew. And incidentally, the children were abused terribly. The mother of the 10-year-old beat her for lying. The priest said they were going to hell. They were actually taken away from their parents and put in jail, and threatened to be killed for this terrible blasphemy of going against the church. Well, the Virgin Mary told them there was going to be a major miracle at our meeting in October. So the crowds grew and grew, and in October there were 70,000 to 120,000 people in this little field. I guess it must have been big to hold them. People of all sorts. There were reporters from around the world, there were newspaper cameramen, atheists, highly religious people, skeptical people. What's going to happen? And what happened at precisely noon, which is when these events occurred, the sun all of a sudden popped out of its place in the air and the sky, started twirling around and dancing, throwing off colors, finally came as if it was crashing down to earth, and all people were screaming that it was the end of the world. And then the sun just went back in its spot and was back there. Now, you can go on the internet and see all the pictures, because all these reporters reporting on it. But it's the famous atheist Richard Dawkins says it's very hard to suggest that 70,000 people could have a mass illusion at the same time. He said, but since there is no God, it could not have happened. We know that.
Well, this is really interesting stuff. We are running out of time, but what are you hoping that readers are going to take away from this one?
My main hope is that they will read this and they say, there is evidence for God.
Okay. Well, thank you. This is Heather Dugan with Zoom into Books. We are at the American Library Association in Chicago, which is wonderful, for the annual conference, which is exciting fun to be here. And I've been talking to Robert Genetski about his book, Is There Evidence for God? An Economist Searches for Answers. Thank you for joining us.